Some legends are told, some turn to dust or to gold, but you will remember me for centuries. Just one mistake is all it will take. We'll go down in history. Remember me for centuries.
The Russian Revolution was very simple. They had this Tsar named Nicholas II that ruled all over Russia. He gained power in 1894 when his father died. He was not that bad of a Tsar, but he made some really bad mistakes. By 1895, just a year after he was crowned, there was already some trouble. Lenin had a brother that tried to kill Nicholas' father years before. And now Lenin wanted to take power away from Tsar Nicholas II, so he was exiled away from Russia. But he was still not dead, and that caused problems for Nicholas II later on. By 1903, there was already two parties, the one that supported Lenin and the ones who supported the Tsar. By 1905, there was this riot. It was the beginning of the revolution. People started protesting around St. Petersburg, and of course Nicholas quickly put an end to it, killing them all. This was called the Bloody Sunday. By 1908, this man came in called Rasputin. He was known by many as a holy man or a healer, but he was also hated by many. He helped cure the Tsar's son, and he was welcomed into the palace with open arms. In 1914, the Great War, or the mother of all wars, better known as World War I, started. Nicholas left Russia to go and command the Russian army at the war. And if that wasn't bad, he left his wife in charge. By 1916, Rasputin is finally killed, but that was not easy at all. He was invited to dinner, and in that dinner he was poisoned. After he was poisoned, he didn't die. So people stabbed him, shot him, and later they drowned him in the river. But he wasn't dead. They found him dead later that day because he died of hypothermia. In 1917, the revolution had started and the people were not doing their jobs. They were just protesting. In March 1917, Nicholas tried to step down to his throne and give him to his brother, but his brother refused. Later, that same year, Lenin came to try to get the power, but he failed and went to hide again. Later that same year, around October, Lenin came back, but this time he gained the power and take control over Russia. In 1918, Lenin backed down from World War I and signed some treaties so the World War I could leave their country alone to deal with his revolution. In March of 1918, the Communist Party was created, and this was the only party in Russia. By 1922, Russia was not called Russia, it was called USSR. That means Union of Soviet Social Republic. And only two years after this, in 1924, Lenin died and Stalin took over.
Some legends are told, some turn to dust or to gold, but you will remember me for centuries. Just one mistake is all it will take. We'll go down in history. Remember me for centuries.
The Mexican Revolution was a series of events that happened from 1910 to 1920. It all started when the president of Mexico, Porfirio Diaz, that had been in power for more than 30 years, when in an interview in the United States, he stated that Mexico was ready for a fully functional democracy, instead of a democratic dictatorship under his rule. After this statement, there were several candidates for a presidential elections. Francisco Ignacio Madero was the main rival for Porfirio Diaz. Porfirio Diaz sent Francisco to jail, but he escaped and promoted the Plan de San Luis, where he unrecognized Porfirio Diaz as Mexico's president. Other important people joined Francisco's armed movement, which had the slogan Sufragio efectivo y no reelección. Like Francisco Villa, that fought from the north, Emiliano Zapata, that fought from the farmers, that didn't have a land of their own, but worked in others' land, and the brothers Flores Magón, that supported him from the west coast. Porfirio Diaz tried to fight back the rebels' forces, but failed, and in the end he had to sign the Treaty of Juarez. After that, Francisco I. Madero ascended to power, but there were several political issues he had to arrange, like the rebels from the Porfiristas and the rage of Emiliano Zapata, who was demanding an immediate law for his people to have the lands that they deserved, and the foreign entrepreneurs, which were angry that Porfirio Diaz was removed from presidency. Then, in February 21 of 1913, the event known as La Decena Trágica was a battle of 10 days in which Victoriano Huerta betrayed Francisco I. Madero and killed him, along with the Vice President Bernardo Reyes. During Huerta's regime, there was another uprising, but this time led by Venustiano Carranza, but with the same allies that Francisco had, Francisco Villa and Emiliano Zapata. There were also new faces in the revolution, like Álvaro Obregón and Plutarco Elías Calles. In the Plan of Guadalupe, Venustiano Carranza led an armed uprising against Victoriano Huerta and won the war, and Huerta ran to Jamaica. After the successful uprising, Mexico was divided into three main groups: the Villistas, led by Francisco Villa, the Carrancistas, led by Venustiano Carranza, and the Zapatistas, led by Emiliano Zapata. Venustiano Carranza was proclaimed himself as president, but wasn't recognized as such in all parts of Mexico, but he was in other parts of the world. He tried to make peace with the other two bands, but wasn't successful. He then proclaimed the agrarian law to satisfy Emiliano Zapata's demands for his people. Then, in 1917, he proclaimed the Constitution of Querétaro. In 1920, Carranza is betrayed by his ally, Álvaro Obregón, and declared the Plan of Agua Prieta, which intended to revoke Carranza from the presidency. In the end, Obregón won, and with this, the Mexican Revolution ended.
Some legends are told, some turn to dust or to gold, but you will remember me for centuries. Just one mistake is all it will take. We'll go down in history. Remember me for centuries.
World War I started on 28th of July 1914 and lasted until November 11, 1918. The main trigger for the World War was the Archduke Franz Ferdinand assassination. It was the fifth most deadly confrontation ever. It received the name of World War because most of the main powers at the time were involved. They were separated into two groups, the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente. The Triple Alliance was formed by the German Empire and Austria-Hungary. The Triple Entente was formed by the United Kingdom, the Russian Empire, France, and later the United States. In total, more than 70 military people, including 60 million Europeans, were mobilized and fought in one of the greatest wars in history. Austria-Hungary, unsatisfied with the response to their government, declared war in Serbia on 28 July 1914. Russia, allied by treaty to Serbia, attacked Austria-Hungary. Germany, allied to Austria-Hungary by treaty, used the Russian attack as a threat of war against Austria-Hungary. Declared war on Russia August 1st of 1914. Britain, allied to France by their relations, defended them. Declared war against Germany on August 4, 1914. With Britain's entry to war, its colonies offered military and financial assistance. United States President Woodrow Wilson declared a USA policy of neutrality. an official stance that would last until 1917 when Germany launched submarines and it threatened America's shipping and it forced the US to finally enter the war on April 6, 1917. Japan, honoring a military agreement with Britain, declared war on Germany on August 23, 1914. 2 days later, Austria-Hungary responded by declaring war on Japan. Italy, although allied to both Germany and Austria-Hungary, was able to avoid entering the fray by signing a clause enabling to evade its obligation to both. In short, Italy was committed to defend Germany and Austria-Hungary only in the event of a defensive war, arguing that their actions were offensive. She declared instead policy of neutrality. The following year, in May 1915, she finally joined the conflict by siding the Allies against her two former allies.
Some legends are told, some turn to dust or to gold, but you will remember me for centuries. Just one mistake is all it will take. We'll go down in history. Remember me for centuries.
The Great Depression basically was the longest economic downturn in human history. The start of the Great Depression in USA was caused by the crash of the stock market in October 24, 1929, called the Black Thursday. Also, another cause is a reduction of purchasing since people didn't trust in the stock market anymore. They started to buy less, and this brought to a reduction of products and then to bankruptcy. In the Roaring 20s, approximately 60% of the population lived in poverty. Also, from 1929 to 1933, the gross national product dropped 33%, and by 1933, this event was on the highest point. Almost 50 million of the Americans were unemployed, and all banks failed. Some of the effects are that Franklin Roosevelt created kind of associations that helped pull out America of the Great Depression. Also, the migration of a lot of Americans trying to have a decent job.
Some legends are told, some turn to dust or to gold, but you will remember me for centuries. Just one mistake is all it will take. We'll go down in history. Remember me for centuries.
A totalitarian society is one where the government organizes every aspect of the lives of the citizens in detail. What job they do, where they work, where they live, and when what kind of accommodation. What luxury goods they are allowed to have, and on an individual family basis, and so on. The 20th century saw the rise of totalitarian regimes in all corners of the world, from the development of fascism to the birth and death of communism. Totalitarian regimes dominated 20th century politics in ways never seen before. Leaders such as Stalin, Hitler, Mao, and Pol Pot ruled as absolute leaders. They crushed opposition, committed human and civil rights violations as well. In general, totalitarianism involves a single mass party, typically led by a dictator, and attempted to mobilize the entire population in support of the official state ideology, and an intolerance of activities which are not directed towards the goals of the state, usually entailing repression and state control of business, labor unions, churches, and political parties. A totalitarian regime is essentially a modern form of authoritarian state, requiring an advanced technology of social control. Although most recognized totalitarian regimes have been fascist and ultranationalist, the degraded communism of Stalin's Soviet Union and Mao Zedong's People's Republic of China were equally totalitarian in nature, and the phrase totalitarian twins has been used to link communism and fascism in this respect. Power. Following World War I, there was a revival of traditional authoritarian regimes, especially in Eastern Europe. By 1938, all the Central and Eastern European countries, only Czechoslovakia, remained true to liberal political ideals. It has been remarked that the reason for this development was the perception that liberal democracy was a failure. By 1928, the Nazi Party had 100,000 members, and Hitler had absolute power control. The Nazis were still a marginal political group, but the world events in 1929 and 1930 produced a new mania for the Hitler program. Hitler was now a totalitarian leader for the Nazism. The political movement doctrine system of the regime of Benito Mussolini in Italy, which encouraged militarism and nationalism, organizing the country along hysterical authoritarian lines, was another powerful totalitarian regime. For example, he outlines 3 principles of a fascist philosophy: everything in the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. These 3 were the main philosophy for him to control the citizens of his totalitarian regime. The use of militarism was implied only as a means to accomplish one of the 3 above principles, mainly to keep the people and the rest of the world in line. Fascist countries are known for their harmony and lack of internal strife. There are no conflicting parties of relation in fascist countries. In September of 1939, the war in Europe began, when Germany, under the power of Adolf Hitler, invaded Poland. Let's just say here that Hitler definitely didn't have a good relationship with Jews or gays, or basically anyone who didn't live up to his bright future expectations. He started out a party campaign, Nazi, which ended up more and more powerful than he actually intended it to be. Did you know Hitler did not do particularly well in school? Leaving formal education in 1905, he was unable to settle into a regular job. He wished to become an artist, but was rejected from the academy in Vienna. Hitler first became interested in politics and how the masses could be affected to respond to certain themes. He was particularly impressed with the anti-Semitic nationalist Christian Socialist Party. During the First World War, he volunteered to fight for the German army and gained the rank of corporal, earning accolades as a dispatch runner. After attending meetings as a spy, he found himself agreeing with the speakers but hating the way they delivered, and so Hitler began writing a passionate speech that would soon give him a fame for speaking. Hitler quickly cemented his reputation as an engaging orator through his passion about the injustice about faced Germany as a result of the Treaty of Versailles. It soon became clear that people were joining the party just to hear Hitler make his speeches, which would leave the audience in a state of near hysteria and willing to do whatever he suggested. His rank grew bigger and higher, and he soon was the leader of a nationalist party, the Nazis, and became the most powerful man of a very powerful organization. Well, after the invasion of Poland, the other countries didn't stay cross-handed. Britain and France responded by declaring war on Germany, but there wasn't much done after that. In 1940, Germany started attacking and conquering countries like Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. Germany also attacked Britain, but this time exclusively from the air. This was Germany's first military defeat. As Hitler plotted his next steps, Italy, an ally of Germany, expanded the war even further by invading Greece, which turned out to be a failure, and North Africa. But Germany was forced to come to Italy's assistance in 1941. There was also a war in the Pacific that began on December 7, 1941. Japan launched a surprise attack in the U.S. Navy based at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. By this time, Japan had already been at war with China for several years and had seized the Chinese territory for Manchuria. After the Pearl Harbor attack, which of course is when the United States decided to participate and see what was going on. Meanwhile, in Germany, on 8 May 1945, the Allies accepted Germany's surrender about a week after Adolf Hitler had committed suicide. Winston Churchill announced V-Day, Victory in Europe. This day marks the end of World War II in Europe. Street parties were held all over Britain to celebrate the end of war, but that's just the end of war in Europe. Japan, on the other hand, began a massive campaign of expansions throughout the Southeast Asia-Pacific region. By the late spring of 1945, most of Japan's conquests had been liberated, or in other words, they have started to rebel against them. The Allies began heavy bombing campaigns against major Japanese cities, including Tokyo. This process continued throughout the summer of 1945, until finally, in August, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on the city of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Stunned by the unexpected devastation, The explosions immediately wiped out around 90% of the city and killed around 80,100 people. Tens of thousands more would later die of radiation exposure. 90% of all medical personnel were killed or disabled, and the remaining medical supplies ran out. Many survivors began to notice the effects of exposure to the bomb's radiation. Their symptoms ranged from nausea, bleeding, and loss of hair to death, and even cancer for future generations. Japan surrendered a few years later after the bombing, ending officially World War II.
Some legends are told, some turn to dust or to gold, but you will remember me for centuries. Just one mistake is all it will take. We'll go down in history. Remember me for centuries.
The Cold War started when the World War II ended, and it ended when the fall of Berlin happened. It is the state of tension. It is called Cold War because there was no direct confrontations. When the weapons are used, the heat increased, they got hot. That's why it wasn't called Hot War. All this was controlled by the superpowers, USA and USSR. Both were looking to extend their ideologies all around the world. USA wanted capitalism, democracy, expansion, and USSR wanted communism expansion. The West was from USA and the East from USSR. These West and East territories were marked with the Iron Curtain. The Iron Curtain is the border which Churchill talked about it, that divides the communist states and the capitalist states. In the 1947, USA created the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. The Truman Doctrine makes other countries to follow him as capitalists, but mainly because USA promised to pay all their damage caused on their territory during the World War II. The Marshall Plan was to contain the communism to avoid their expansion. But that's not all. How to forget the Comecon, created in 1949 by USSR. He was not going to stay delayed. He also focused on the same as USA to make other countries be communist. USA created the CIA and SOA. The CIA means Central Intelligence Agency, which prepared people to be spies on the territory of communism to know their strategies and to be prepared to that. And SOA means School of Americans. They give special training to the people to be police, soldiers, etc. But to protect the states that joined to USA. The proxy wars came. They are armed confrontations that happened during the Cold War, where superpowers use other countries as substitution and manipulation instead of attacking directly against them. Some of the proxy wars are Cuban Missile Crisis, Bay of Pigs, and Korean War. Then the non-aligned countries came. They were countries that don't like to be neither capitalist nor communist, and they formed the non-aligned movement around the 1957. The Brion Conference was made. In this conference, the President Nasser, Nehru, and Tito settled down officially the NAM, inspired on Bandung principles. After that, they waited a year to create the Belgrade Conference in 1961, where they invited all the non-aligned countries to join them. The Wall of Berlin divided Berlin into two, East and West. The East was protected by USSR and China, and the West by USA and the UN. It was created by the West to be protected to expansion of the capitalism in the west of Berlin, until the people of both sides were decided to open peacefully the wall, and it happened.
Good afternoon, Mr. John. How are you?
Oh,
I'm here to ask you some questions.
okay.
Okay, are you prepared?
I'm prepared.
It is a question about the Mexican Revolution. What do you think that Porfirio Diaz what do you think about Porfirio Diaz?
He was, on one hand, he was a dictator, and we know really dictators are terrible things. He took away democracy. In another way, he did very modern things that we're doing today, like he brought foreign companies in to invest in Mexico. he developed the infrastructure with the railway network. I mean, in those days, Mexico had more railways than any other country on the planet. The Mexican economy was equal to the economies of France and Britain, which was like the biggest economies at the time, at the expense of all the poorest people who expropriate their land. The native peoples who, for them, owning land was the basis of their culture, and a lot of the time it was taking it away from them and given it to foreign corporations. So Mexico grew massively under Porfirio Diaz, but at the expense of the native peoples. Was it a good thing or bad thing? I can never support a dictatorship, so I have to say bad.
And how do you think other countries influenced over Mexican Revolution?
I don't think other countries had a massive impact on the causes and what happens. There's a few foreign fighters involved, I mean Henry Lane Wilson, I think was the diplomat from the US. He kind of engineered a lot of it against who was the president? Madero. He kind of had a pathological hatred of Madero, and he sought to like undermine him, which is strange because he was democratically elected. Apart from the US ambassador to Mexico, I don't think foreign countries had a big influence over the Mexican Revolution. It was purely a Mexican thing that happened.
The next question is about World War I. Do you think there was friction between the nations before the World War started?
Oh, definitely. I mean, before the war, the militarism, the way the countries were building their armies, and the arms race that was going on. Germany was releasing like huge battleships, and Russia and France were trying to compete, and military spending was like, for Germany, it was 5 times more than the 100 years before. So yeah, I mean, at the time, European countries had under their control a large part of the world, most of the countries on the planet. And the way they did that was they were all competing with each other to try and grab more land for themselves. So there's a lot of friction between the countries, especially Germany and France, Italy and Austria, Serbia and Austria again. Serbia wanted independence from Bosnia. Austria wanted to keep Bosnia under their control, and they started to feel like they were losing parts of their empire. Europe was not a very harmonious place before World War I.
Okay. Can you mention some of the causes and effects from World War I?
Some of the causes, the military build-up in the countries, the alliance system. All the countries had these alliances to kind of like to scare off other countries from attacking them. So if you attack me, you're going to have to fight with my allies too. But it had the opposite effects that once a little event, like the assassination of the Archduke in Sarajevo, it triggered the alliances. Other reasons, nationalist feeling, people were like very patriotic. They thought that war was right and it was good, and they had to go and fight for their countries. The empires that were going on, and the assassination of the Archduke finally was the trigger that set off, or that triggered the alliances that brought all the countries into conflict with each other.
The effects?
The effects, just look at the map, pre-1914 and post-1918, and you can see the Austro-Hungarian Empire was broken up into so many different countries. Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia was born, Finland was born out of that, and then effects, the effects, we're still feeling today, some of them. In 1917, I think it was, Russia had the communist revolution. They set up communism, which for the next 45 years, 65 years, was the dominant force in the world. Communism was spreading around the world, and that was born out of it. What else? I know the reparations that Germany had to pay at the end of it They've only just finished paying that off. And then, of course, it led to World War II. Directly led to World War II with the rise of fascism in Germany. So nothing good came out of that war whatsoever, apart from the formation of some countries. I'm sure those people are happy that countries exist.
Are you ready for the Russian Revolution?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. What factors and events led to the Russian Revolution?
Well, a lot of events. The Enlightenment movement, ideas about democracy and liberty, an outdated system of government with like an absolute monarch, like Tsar Nicholas II, just an old-fashioned government that's not right for the people. The effects of World War I, the way that, they were sending soldiers a guy off the street, no military training, no weapons, and then sending him over the top of the trench to attack the enemy. The immediate causes were lack of food back in Moscow. People didn't have bread. And the same old story for any revolution, that people were hungry. The government weren't providing food. Given the choice to starve to death or revolt, people are going to choose to revolt. Other causes, dissatisfaction with the military. The sailors revolt against the high command. Just a lot of culmination of events that happened at the time.
Okay. And during the civil war that followed the revolution, why did the Allies give aid to the anti-communist forces?
Because that's a good question. That's a hard question. All right. Edit that bit out where it says hard question. Okay. So why did they give support to the Allies? A fear of communism spreading over Europe. That lasted a long time after. They had the White Army and the Red Army. The White Army was like anti-communism, the Red Army was pro-communism. So I think that the White Army were more like for democracy and like pro-Western ideas. I think they probably felt it would go into a dictatorship later on. And under dictatorship, that's what happens. A huge Russian army under a dictator is a pretty scary thing.
Okay, we're moving on to the Great Depression. How do you think the World War I led to the Great Depression?
How did World War I lead to the Great Depression? Well, war destroys a lot of things. Europe wasn't destroyed, it destroyed people's minds. I think after the war, Germany was obviously in an economic mess. All the countries were in an economic mess. War's an expensive game to play. Germany lost because the inflation of the Deutschmark just made feeding the population back home impossible and paying an army impossible. How it led to the Great Depression? I don't think it led directly. Economics is a difficult thing to understand. We see that today, it's like a wild animal. We don't really understand what's going to happen. That's why we have depressions today and recessions, it goes up. I'm not sure how it related to the Great Depression.
The next topic is going to be World War II. What was Hitler's master plan for creating an area of racial empire?
I think Nazism, as an ideology, it started very small, and later on it took turns that were not really planned a long time ago, but were kind of natural. For example, when Hitler joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party, his main immediate cause was to get into power. Once he was in power, the next cause was to take control of Germany and make himself the most powerful man. Then it was the elimination from Jews from German life. Then once they completed that, the next step was the extermination of the Jews. Then after that, well, we don't know because they lost the war. We can only guess what their next plans would have been. Probably, I think it would have been the extermination of inferior countries. But I don't think Nazism, where it started out, had a long-term plan. It was like a short-term plan to short-term plan. But you can obviously see the direction that we're going in. I think if they won the war, what happened to the Jewish people once they were made extinct, they would have turned on countries. I try to say this to the kids too, like, you know, when today they're drawing swastikas, I said, look, if Hitler won the war, I mean, what would his stance towards Mexico be? I think the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Mexicans would have been okay, but the darker-skinned Mexicans, perhaps not.
Okay. Could the Allies have beaten Germany without a second front in Europe?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. I mean, there's a debate now about who won the war, and growing up in England, we said we won the war, and then I started to watch movies, American movies, and like, no, we won the war. And there's a bit of debate with that. In my opinion, personal opinion, I think the Russian peasant won the war. I mean, even when Nazi Germany attacked Russia in Operation Barbarossa, even his own generals were saying to him, don't start a second front. I mean, that is suicide. Look at World War I, we did the same thing, we lost then. But Hitler, ideology is in control. Hitler's not even in control. You know, Germany's natural enemy is Russia, so we must attack our natural enemies, which is Russia. It doesn't matter, yes, a second front, that's disastrous, but they're our enemies and we have to attack them. Answer the question, what was the question?
The question was, could the Allies have beaten Germany without a second front?
No, I very much doubt it. If Hitler had invaded Britain, what he should have done, the USA would have found it very difficult to go across the Atlantic Ocean with their soldiers and tanks and weapons, tried to make it on the beaches, and then attack. I mean, what they did is they went to Britain like a stepping stone, and from Britain they could organise themselves in a short hop across France, and you want some continental Europe. So absolutely, definitely, 100% not.
Thank you. We're going towards the Cold War, which is our last question. Why do you think the communists and the capitalists have problems with each other and could not coexist?
I mean, it's just like, I think what's true for like people is true for countries. I mean, like, I don't like that guy. He's a bit different from me. I mean, capitalism works by free market business opportunities. Capitalism is the complete opposite of that. Communism is the complete opposite of that, because the government controlling everything. I mean, if you're the owner of a corporation and your business opportunities are being limited or being threatened by communists abroad, the natural thing in capitalism is to lobby the government and say, look, I want you, I pay for you, the politicians, this guy over here, these communists in this country are threatening my business, I could lose millions of here, so you've got to do something about that, those people. I mean, if you look at the Cold War, the capitalists were always way more aggressive than the communists. The communists just tried to spread the ideology. Capitalists tried to stop it. I mean, they were just trying to encourage other countries to be communist mostly. We saw things like the invasion of Afghanistan by Russia. But pretty much capitalism was way more aggressive towards communism than the communists were towards capitalists. Just because people want to make money much more than people in the country want to be communists.
Who do you think would have won if the USA and the USSR would not have reached a peace agreement?
Who would have won? Oh, well, I mean, it's not that capitalism won, it's that communism failed. And we saw in Glasnost. Glasnost is the time when the people who lived in the communist bloc said, no, we've had enough of this stupid system. There's no food, there's no freedom, liberty. It's an unnatural system, communism. It's not, I mean, in a capitalist society, it's not perfect. You've got a lot of problems in capitalism. But at least you're free to direct your own life. I mean, who wants to live into a system where the government say, right, you're going to work in a factory 18 hours a day? I mean, who wants to live like that? So it's not that capitalism won, it's that people who lived under communism had just had enough of it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. That will be
Staring at the carnage, praying that the sun would never rise. Living another day in disguise. These feelings can't be right. Lend me your courage to stand up and fight.